This is a story about two things that went wrong. Welcome to my second installment of making my feminine version of a Hobbit. Last week we talked about my red velveteen coat, and now we're gonna talk about the lower half of the outfit. This is part of my New Zealand costume making process adventure that didn't quite go as planned, but I made it work in the end. But before we get to the end, let's go back to when I thought it would work. I'm going between two styles, like Hobbit girl or feminine inspired Bilbo Baggins. There's differences there, and I'm trying to figure out which way I want to go. I do want a skirt. I was going between making pants or big fluffy bloomer historical kind of pants, but I decided to just go with a skirt. I like a skirt look, and I think I'll cartridge pleat the waistband. I was also playing with the idea of putting a petticoat underneath of some fun fabric that could pull up the outer wool skirt and tuck it in a waistband, and you'd see the petticoat. Something like you see Belle do in the live action movie, or there's some of these paintings that I just really like that style. To me, it looks Hobbit-ish, especially because in The Hobbit, it talks about hobbits liking to wear bright colors. And I think that also it feels like they'd have fun with their outfits. I found this fabric in my stash that I've had forever. I got, I think, for $2 a yard on clearance. It's kind of like a canvasy, soft canvas. Canvas is probably not the word for it, but it's got also some fun seersucker texture in the stripes. And I just like the color, and I wanted to use it for something. And I think this is the right project to use it for. It's not a super bright color, but it works well with the other materials that I got. So I'm gonna make the petticoat out of this, but I've actually decided to make them into kind of secret pants, taking inspiration from all the Narnia looks that I'm making, that they have an overskirt and then secret pants underneath. It's probably leaning more on the Bilbo Baggins look as far as going on an adventure. I am probably gonna make them looser pants versus I thought about doing bloomers, kind of the fluffy bloomers underneath, but I think that creates too much of a cutesy look to it. So I'm just gonna do secret pants, and I'm gonna start with that because I know I want to do that, and then I'll move on to the wool skirt because that's another aspect I know the style I want. Then I have to decide what I want as far as the blouse and the vest and the jacket. So we'll come back to that. I am going to use kind of an improvised version of my Cinderella bloomers, and I kind of just had fun with that style, and are cut on a bias. And I think that'll look really fun in this striped, having that bias look to it. Now I also have to decide if I want to do some sort of reverse print trim on the secret pants to really add fun character to it. I haven't decided that yet. We're trying to just get creative with this Hobbit look. This is my one New Zealand costume I can get creative on because it's not a replica. I'm trying to just have fun with it while still staying true to my vision, even though my vision is very blurred right now. I at least kind of know. So let's get started. My Cinderella pattern did need some adjustments with the length, but also the side hip darts. I don't want darts on these underpants. Instead, I decided to add some extra panels at the side that will have a different angle of the stripe. So yes, I decided to get creative with the stripe pattern. In order to do this, I cut the pant leg less full and then sliced down the entire length at 3 points around the area of the pattern's darts. And then I cut some pieces on the straight grain. These are placed in the slices of the pant leg. And voila, I've made some fun variations with the stripe. And now it's just sewing all of these together to reconstruct the pant leg. These seams are ironed open and then towards the straight grained panels. Ironing seams open first helps the seam fall over to one side easier and smoother. To keep these in place and add some detail, a top stitch is done along the seams. With the pant leg all back to one piece, the seam is sewn to make it a pant leg, and of course this is all repeated for the second leg. From here, the crotch seam is sewn. The back 9 or so inches is left unsewn because we need an opening. Because these are underpants, I decided on a very simple closure. I made extra large seam allowances at the back, so I folded this over and hand stitched it in place for the outer edge. And then the inner edge, I did a small hemmed edge. This created a little overlap between the edges. I'll probably add some hooks and eyes to this eventually so I can wear it not under something, but for now it was just left open. For the waistband, I cut a strip of fabric, turned in the edges, and then ironed it in half. This is then just slipped over the waist edge of the pants and top stitched in place. A button and a hand sewn buttonhole. What was I thinking with that and my crazy deadline? But anyway, that's the closure. The final step is the hem. I cut some wide bias strips and got these sewn to each of the pant legs. From here, the seam is ironed open, and then the bias strip is folded all the way over to contain the seam. Again, ironing open the seam first helps with this complete fold over of the bias edge. And now I hand sewed down the hemmed edge because I had all the time in the world. I had over 3 weeks before I left, and I only had to weave some fabric and make 3 other costumes. All the time in the world to hand sew a hem. That was completely sarcastic. I made a bunch of costumes for when I went to New Zealand over 2 years ago. You can find the videos about making the other 3 outfits, which are all Narnia replicas, on my channel, and this Hobbit look is the final one to share about. But yes, I made all of these costumes within 5 weeks, and that did include weaving my own fabric, 6 yards of it, for my Susan Narnia replica, which was totally crazy. So yeah, hand sewing a hem, especially on a pair of underpants that ended up not being used, felt like a waste of time looking back, but in the moment I didn't know. And also these only took 6.5 hours to make, and I was able to check something off the list, which was a huge win in the moment. So next up, the wool outer skirt. I ended up doing some of the work off camera late at night, and so some of the footage might seem kind of out of order, but we will go step by step of how it was created. It is a fairly basic skirt. It is made out of a rectangle. It's hemmed on the bottom edge and then cartridge pleated at top. My skirt has 2 seams, one on either side. I placed them at the sides because one will have a closure and then the other has a pocket, because of course a Hobbit needs a pocket. Really, everyone needs a pocket, so it needs a pocket. The basics of creating a pocket to put inside a seam of a skirt or pants or pretty much anything, you can start with basically a rectangle piece of fabric, double the length of what you need. So this piece is all the way down here and then fold it in half. Really, you'd want to tack this edge to the waistband to hold the weight of whatever you put in your pocket. Otherwise, it's gonna pull on the fabric and just make the pocket not lay as smoothly. I skipped that step because again, I was in a hurry and I attached 2 facing pieces. That facing is attached to the pocket edge on both sides of the long piece. So one side here and one side here, and then that whole piece is folded in half and aligns the 2 facing pieces together. Now that is your pocket opening. So then one side of your facing is sewn to one edge of the seam, and the other facing piece is sewn to the second edge. And now when your seam is sewn up, you have an opening that is both faced. So your pocket facing is on both sides of it. and what's happened inside when we've folded that piece in half to attach the facing edge to both sides of the skirt, and then you sew the top and side edges to make that an enclosed space, and there you have a pocket. On this second edge, we have the closure or opening of the skirt, and that seam was just left unsewn for about 9 or 10 inches, and both sides are faced with a placket. I just used rectangle pieces attached to one side, and then it's folded all the way over, and that secures the edge and creates a nice folded edge, which is the top edge of the skirt. And then this second edge gets a piece of fabric. On this one, I just left the seams exposed. You could serge that or finish that however you want, but it's just a seam, and this part of the placket stays open. It's extending the skirt opening. Now turned right side out, we have an underlap, and then we have our outer edge, which has that facing piece, and when pulled together, we now have a closure that mostly hides itself because that placket has been created out of that same fabric. Now that we've talked about the placket seam and the pocket seam, we now have a circle of the rectangle piece because it's all connected. And we now have two edges that need to be finished. One is the hem edge and the other is the top waistband edge. Because this fabric is so thick, I didn't want to turn over the edge again under there to contain that raw edge. So instead I sewed on a piece of twill tape that contains that raw edge, and then I hand sewed it in place. And we get an invisible hem from the front. To start the cartridge pleats, the top edge is folded over about 3 inches, and now I'm marking a bunch of lines so that I can create even pleats. My marks are about 1 inch apart vertically and 1/2 inch apart horizontally. The horizontal line is to keep my sewing lines straight, and the vertical ones are to keep all my stitches even and the same length. Three lines of stitches are then hand sewn. I used a heavyweight linen thread, waxed, and I cut it several inches longer than my waist. I have 3 of these threads, and they are all sewn along the edge. My stitches are 1/2 inch long, so yes, I could have marked my vertical lines 1/2 inch apart, but I figured it would be easy enough to save some marking and eyeball that stitch in the middle of my 1 inch markings. Once I got to the end of the thread on all 3 lines, I could then gather up the pleats, and now I have more room in the thread to continue on. This is repeated on and on until I reach the end. This was finished with the last bit pulled up and then arranged till I got my waist measurement and all of the thread was secured. Now to attach the waistband. Because of the fabric thickness, I cut 1 strip in the wool and another in a thin cotton. These were sewn together around all but one edge and then turned to the right side. Once ironed smooth, this is my waistband that will get attached to all the pleats. The right edge of the waistband is against the outer edge of the pleats and pinned in place. To sew the pleats, the stitch goes through the folded edge of the waistband and the top outer edge of the pleat. Because of how bulky my pleats are, I did 2 stitches through each pleat all the way around. Once those are all sewn, the second edge of these pleats are just left hanging free. This is the great part about cartridge pleats. It allows you to get so much more volume of fabric into a waistband and kind of pops it out along the hips. The final step was to attach some clasps along the waistband. Here we have the two finished pieces together. And before you say anything, let me explain what I mean when I say I didn't wear the underpants and the skirt just didn't work. I know it kind of looks okay, and we can pull up the skirt like I was envisioning, and it looks like that. Not bad, not bad. I know it's probably my perfectionist speaking when I say it didn't work, but just let me explain. So this outer skirt fabric was chosen out of my stash, and I just wanted to save some money and not have to buy a new wool because I really wanted a wool skirt, and so I made it out of this. This is a very heavyweight wool, and it was that part of it that made it feel very clunky to me, especially when I was going for that feminine version of Bilbo, and I felt like the skirt structure just kind of made it look too, I don't know what the right word is. It just felt too bulky and clunky, especially with this pulled up like this. Now, when I'm wearing my vest with it, it was also like, it would just made the vest look funny to have it tucked in like that. And just overall, the skirt, when we untuck it like that, it's very poofy at the waist because of those cartridge pleats, which that's what it's supposed to be. But on top of it being a thick fabric, it just never quite was what I was imagining. So that just disappointed me in general, especially with my red coat over everything. The proportions just felt off with how thick my wool skirt is. Now, overall, I think it's a nice skirt, but it's just not what I was envisioning, you know, just what I mean. But then we have the underpants. First of all, it was very warm in New Zealand when we were filming a lot of the Hobbit shots, and putting on an extra layer just felt, I don't know, it just felt hot. And also it was usually a quick change into my Hobbit look when we drive by somewhere that was really beautiful and like, let's take pictures, or we would hike to wherever we were going, and so putting on an extra layer just felt like a lot. And so I did have them in New Zealand, but I never wore them under my Hobbit look, which I'm kind of sad about because I do like them and I wish I had just followed through and done it for some of the photos. But hindsight is 2020, so yeah, the underpants did not make an appearance in New Zealand, even though they were there. And my outer skirt, it does work, but it's always one of those pieces that I look at the pictures and I'm like, if it was like a thinner weight wool, it would have been perfect. Like really, I think it would have just, but that is the mind of Bella May as she's designing something. When it's something that I am just coming out of the blue with my own things, I will always critique my design. It's part of what happens. But overall, I am happy with all my looks. It's just sad that we didn't get proper moment for the underpants. So this video is the proper moment for the underpants. But with all that said, the next video will be about this yellow blouse, which was dyed with turmeric, and is made out of only rectangles and squares in a very creative historical way. So stay tuned for that next video, and then we'll talk about the green vest that I wear on top of it that has welt pockets, because of course I added welt pockets when I was running out of time for making things. Also, you can purchase all the patterns for this whole Hobbit look. That includes the jacket, the vest, the shirt, the skirt, and the pants, and also a bonus of the cape. Thanks again for watching, and thank you to my patrons, YouTube members, and Instagram subscribers for their continued support. And now go out there and learn, create, and inspire.